Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. Today I'm speaking with Ori Keren, CEO and co-founder of LinearB, a software delivery management solution that's raised over $70 million in funding. Ori, thanks for chatting with me today.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Brett, for having me.
Not a problem. Super excited to chat with you. So to kick things off, can we just start with a quick summary of who you are and a bit more about your background?
Yeah, so my name is Ori Keren. I'm the co-founder and CEO of LinearB. We're going to talk about the company probably, but my background, I like to always start the story at the age of 13. I got a Singular Spectrum 48K, which was my first computer, and, played games on it with my friends. But I also found this book of BASIC, on how to program in BASIC. And, you put some commands into the computer and it does things. And to me, that was a moment of magic. And yeah, that's where I started to develop that hobby of developing software. By the way, side by side by playing basketball, that was my other hobby. But I kind of left it out there. And when everybody does a mandatory army service in Israel, so I'm based in Tel Aviv, I'm based in Israel, so did the army service. And after that, I decided to try and see, check out this software development thing if I really liked it. And I really liked it actually. And I got my first job as a developer and then went to university and studied it as well, side by side by, progressing in my career. For a while, I developed, almost, I think, in every language that was out there at the time, C, C++, Java, all those languages. And after a while, I accepted a promotion, was a team leader, director of engineering. I was twice VP of engineering in software companies here in Tel Aviv that, startups that grew fast and became successful and were acquired by big companies. The first was a company called Interwise that AT&T acquired back in 2007. And more recent is a company called CloudLock, which was a CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, a security company, in which I was the VP of R&D of that company, but also the GM of the Israel site. So I had two roles. This was a very, very interesting journey. I learned a lot from it. And yeah, that's my background. After that, we were acquired by Cisco. And that was kind of where the seed were planted, to start LinearB. But we can talk about LinearB later.
So I got to ask, you mentioned basketball there. Where does the Israeli love for basketball come from? I just had on the founder of Rapid the other day, and he was talking all about basketball. He told me his biggest life goal and motivation, or one of the biggest life goals, is to buy an Israeli basketball team. Where's this connection with Israel and basketball?
Yeah, so Israel actually, there was this very successful team in Israel, Maccabi Tel Aviv, which made a lot of success in Europe, and basketball is a very popular sport in Israel. I have a stronger connection to basketball because my father was a basketball player. He was actually, in the national team and won the European championship once. So I had this inspiration, of course, to become a basketball player. I wasn't as good as him, so I didn't make, but I really loved playing basketball, and I still love to play and watch. So yeah, Israel has this good basketball foundation.
Who's your favorite basketball player of all time?
Wow, my kid is asking me this question all the time. So if you ask me who's the best, I have no doubt it's MJ. Is the GOAT. He was but he's not my favorite because, I love the underdogs. So they were so dominant. I always wanted other teams to beat them. So my favorite basketball player at all time would have to be Isaiah Thomas, because I really like those, players that are, probably didn't have all the conditions to be successful in terms of how big they are, and still, fought their way. So this is my favorite basketball. I actually had the same number of him, 11.
What about founders? Who is your favorite founder or favorite CEO, or maybe just the CEO or founder that you've really been inspired by?
Yeah, so my favorite founder is somebody that I never met. And it's my grandfather. I had two grandfathers. One, that I had like a lot of quality time with until he passed away. And the second passed away when I was only 1 year old. But this grandfather, he was like, I keep hearing stories about him, and I keep on investigating. And one day I'm going to investigate it a little bit more. He built a construction company, even though he had no proper education. He came to Israel, did Aliyah, came from Romania, was able to build like this big construction company. He paved a lot of like the roads here in Israel. And he was very, very successful at the time, and then crashed, and lost all his fortune, and then bounced again, built a company. He did this journey like 2 or 3 times where, from fame and glory down to like having, to build himself like from scratch again. And every time I hear another story about him, I get more inspired because he knew how to take care of his people. And of course, knew he had resiliency and knew how to bounce back. So he's my favorite founder. And I never met him, or I met him only when I was a baby.
Wow. Super cool story. And that's so cool to have your top inspiration come from a family member. Most people here say like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or someone like that, which, obviously they're inspirational, but it's always cool when it can be a family member. What about books? Is there a specific book that's had a major impact on you, not just as a founder, but as a human being living in this crazy world?
Yeah. So there's a lot of good founders books. I love, of course, Ben Horowitz in his book, but the book that inspired me the most as a person and as a human is a book called A Man's Search for a Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he tells the story of Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor that became a very famous psychiatrist. And while he was like in the, the concentration camps and all, he saw this phenomena where people that, had like some hope or something to live for, or some loved one that they were waiting to meet, or some job or work that they really like, or everything that kept them like, inspired to survive this horrible experience and do something with, had increased their chances to survive. There's a lot of great quotes in this book and a lot of great stories. I remember that this book made like such a great impact on me. I actually went back and read it again. So that's probably my favorite book of all time.
It's probably been 10 years since I've read that book. So I need to go back and read it again, because when I read it, it really put my life in perspective. When I think I'm having a bad year or, business is tough, things like that, or just personal challenges, you read that book and you have a whole new perspective on life. So really a huge, huge fan of that book.
You're right. It puts everything in perspective. But also, I remember while reading it, it's like, it is not like saying how awful it was. He described it from this place of like, in some way, very interesting, logical, like way to look at and the challenges life throws at you. And yeah, life definitely throws the most difficult challenges at him.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's switch gears here and let's dive into the company. So can we just start with the elevator pitch? In simple terms, what does the company do?
We're a software delivery management platform. Basically, what it means, we help engineering organizations measure themselves and accelerate how they deliver software. Our main persona, or the main individual that will consume our product, or our buyer, is the VP of engineering. And we come to help like the VP of engineering in what we call that dual mandate that they have to master. On one hand, ever since like the Agile Manifesto was published like 22 years ago, and, then CI/CD and everything, engineering leaders, they need to master operational efficiency. They need to make sure that everything is flowing in their org, especially as they scale. When I went through this journey, like I told you, and it's tough, right? Because you have to speak the engineering language. You have to make sure your teams are aligned right. And you have to make sure it's almost like one specific language that you speak with your engineering organization. The second part of that dual mandate is engineering leaders, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, are also required to be business leaders. And they need to make sure that they align what their engineering organization is doing with the business needs. What does it mean? Like FinOps is getting into like the engineering practices. So what projects are we working on? How much do they cost? What's their business impact? Is it worthwhile to continue to invest in them, to increase the investment, or maybe, to stop them, or maybe just to keep them as they are? Look at the investment on the total investment. How much dollars are we spending just to keeping the lights on versus, innovation and, feature enhancements, etc. So our product covers all of that, measures all of that, gives you visibility to all of that, but also gives especially the platform engineering teams and the developers an infrastructure and programming languages to write rules to solve the problems that they are seeing. So for example, let's say that I'm identified that my CI, is taking too long. Developers can write rules that say, let's just run a specific part of the CI suite for that type of change. So classify the changes and respond to them accordingly. Same goes for how code is being merged, which is one of the biggest bottlenecks in the software delivery lifecycle right now. So they can write rules like, if we're just changing like an image or the static code or a test, let the code be merged automatically versus, if we're touching the crown jewels or something very important, let's put 2 or 3 reviewers on that. So that's software delivery management in a nutshell.
Super fascinating. And can you give us an idea of the growth you're seeing today and any metrics or numbers that you can share? Our audience loves to hear metrics.
Yeah. So we started the company in 2019. We had a couple of design partners and a small number of customers, but 2021 is the year where we started to see some significant growth. We grew 6x in terms of revenue, from the first couple of hundreds of thousands of ARR. Then we grew 3x, a little bit even more than that in 2022. And we're on that trajectory to go over 2x this year to hopefully 2.5x. So without getting into the specific numbers, we believe that in this, market and in these conditions, this is a growth that we're really proud at. Yeah, so those are the growth in terms of ARR, etc. We also like the engineering metrics. We're customer zero. So we're the first customer of our own, product. So every time somebody asks me about metrics, I can answer about the growth metrics. But I'm also very proud that our cycle time, meaning how much time it takes, from when code is being committed until it's in production, it used to be in the areas of 9 days. And now it's in the areas of less than 2 days. So I have this thing where every time somebody asks me about metrics, I also being very proud on our engineering metrics and how we improve them.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. What do you attribute to that success and growth? Because I think there's a lot of noise in this space. So I have to imagine it's not easy to rise above the noise and connect with engineering leaders like this. What have you gotten right?
There's a bunch of things. It started, of course, me and my partner, Dan Lyons, who was also an ex-engineering leader. I think both of us are product people at our essence, we're developers and we like product and we're laser focused on just making sure the product is the best. It's not enough, of course. I think another thing that we did, which was unique and different, is early on we said to ourselves, we are operating in sort of I wouldn't say it's a new category, but it's a category that we're kind of alternating a little bit its definition. So we got to educate the market, or at least tell our philosophy and look for avenues to amplify our philosophy and tell exactly how we think it should be done. So, for example, one of the things we did, which is probably not typical for a company our size, we invested a lot in a podcast that is super popular called Dev Interrupted, that would bring a lot of engineering leaders that talk about how they think, things should be measured and handled. So we did that, and we have our own event. Sometimes it takes companies a lot of, energy and time to get to an event that can drive 1,700 people, a virtual event. And we got to this very early on because of a conscious choice to invest in this, so we can tell our story, talk about our philosophy, and let the audience, judge and say if it's something that is interesting. I think that was one of the things that drove the early success for us.
I talk with a lot of founders about starting podcasts, and a lot of them say, how do I measure ROI on this? And how do I make sure that, we're getting direct revenue impact?
How do you measure that ROI from the podcast?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll be very open and very honest that it's hard. There is a science around it that you can, do multi-touch attribute. You can understand if somebody was a listener at one point. But I think at the end, you got to take like brave choice if you want to do it, yes or no. By the way, for us, we believe in people. So we had people in the company that were very passionate about it. And if you go with the passion of your people, great things will happen, especially if they're talented, like the talented people we have in our company. So there were a lot of people that wanted to do this. And so I can sit here all day and tell you, Brett, we planned it in advance and, we knew it was going to, well, we didn't know. We just went with the passion of our people and we built like this great podcast. Well, now we're improving and measuring the ROI of it, but it did this big splash for us and big noise for us that is not, it can't be scientifically measured. And yeah, so again, I think we had our intuition of listening to our people that that's the right thing to do, drove a lot of this success. And yeah, they're right. The people, it's really hard to measure the exact, attribution. Like we get, customers that say, you know what, we came to you because we listened to the podcast, but it's not just that. They listened to the podcast and then they read like a piece of blog and then they went on trial. So it's hard. There's this multi-touch, attribution thing going on. And if you want a very accurate like ROI, it's hard to do with the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's just very hard in general, right? When you're looking at B2B and complex sales cycles, it's not just selling a toothbrush on Instagram where someone sees the ad, instantly clicks, they buys, and you can measure the direct ROI immediately. I think with enterprise B2B, those sales cycles are just much, much more complex.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we divide it to what we call like more the transactional, demand and more the hybrid one. In the transactional side, sometimes, people like see a campaign, they sign up, they want the demo and we start the sale process, right? But like you said, in most cases, it's more complex. Like, okay, it's a hybrid motion of listen to a podcast, read a piece of a blog, talk to us, rest for 2 months because you need the time, to go by and you understand that you really need it. So you got to master both of these, the hybrid and the transactional.
And if I look online, there's probably like 500 or more podcasts for developers. Do you think one thing that made your podcast unique is that it's specifically focused on engineering leaders and not the developers themselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's for engineering leaders and for people that aspire to be engineering leaders. And I'll tell you that we identified that there's a vacuum there. Yeah, as developers, there was conferences and podcasts all the time. As engineering leaders, it's one of the loneliest jobs in the universe. So we definitely told ourselves, hey, there's a need. If we build it, they will come because it's lonely and there's a vacuum. So I definitely think the answer is yes.
And you mentioned there that you started the company in 2019 and it really started to gain major traction in 2021. What was happening in that 2-year period? Was it just a rush to try to find product market fit, get the messaging right, get the positioning right? What was going on in that 2-year period? And what did you do to hit that growth in 2021?
I would say 2019, it's the first year we had like design partners that became customers. We actually got 15 or 20 customers really fast. And then, they became customers. We're obsessed with what people are doing with our product. So we tracked that and we saw they're logging in, looking at the dashboard, logging out. And we said to ourselves, wait, that's not the way to build a software delivery management platform. You got to make it more sticky, make sure it's being rolled out to more people in the organization. So in 2020 is where we did this transformation. By the way, it was a product transformation, but also sort of like a go-to-market transformation, or at least we added another go-to-market motion, a PLG go-to-market motion. We said, okay, we're sitting on this hub of data. Let's make sure we also give value to the engineering leaders, the team leaders, the directors, and to the developers at the end. Because at the end of the day, when you want to roll out this type of solution, you got to give some value for developers. And what is the value for developers? They don't care about metrics or to measure things. They want their pull requests or the thing that they're working on to be merged much more efficiently and faster. So we invested a lot of energy in that. So I would say 2019 and 2020 is what it helped us figure out how to make sure the value that we deliver is touching multiple personas. and also how to convince the buyer and the VP of engineering to get to the value faster. Also develop like this, PLG go-to-market motion for small teams. We give the product for free for teams for up to 8. So it created this like learning energy, but also got us like a lot of those leads, and that got us like ready to grow in 2021. And then, other things happen in the universe, 2021, COVID and all of that. People ask me if that contributed or not. I don't know. Like I only experienced, my third year with the company in 2021. So I don't have a benchmark like to compare it like to a regular year, but it could be that it accelerated it because, people were working from home, that hybrid motion like got more popular. So the need in product like ours increased.
I mentioned there in the intro that you've raised over 70 million in funding. What have you learned about fundraising? Are there any insights and lessons that you can share with the founders listening in?
Yes, definitely. I think I'll start and say that I think the investors and the board that we have today is amazing. And my best tip is don't always go on the best deal that is offered. I know it could sound like a cliche, but this is a true partnership. Like CEO are the people that you want to do business with. You got to work a lot with your investors. So it's almost like an interview. You got to make sure that the chemistry is there. I didn't know all of that, when we started, but as the round progressed, and then we did our B round, we took our time. We met with more people. We said, okay, of course the valuation matters. I won't say that it didn't, but I think that's my most important tip. Don't go on the best, higher offer, but rather, look for the people that you believe that you can work with and that they're aligned with your vision. They understand what you're trying to do. That's the best tip that I can give.
And outside of fundraising, based on everything that you've learned so far, if you had to start the company again today from scratch, what would be the number one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
I would say enjoy yourself. That's the tip I would give myself, because it's a long journey. And I think sometimes we want to think about like the end game and what's going to happen. And there's a lot of like highs and lows. So I think the most important thing is like for founders is to remember to enjoy. When you enjoy what you do, and of course, it's not just pure fun. Of course, there's a lot of like challenges. But when you focus on, I'll go back to a story where I began with, like, when I was 13 and I built this, I'll start building those programs. And I don't know if I told you, but I forced my sister and my mother like to play with the crappy games that I wrote. I get the same joy today when you're releasing a feature and people are doing something with it, even like the first, 2 users. So I would say find like the thing that you're enjoying, that you get joy from. Remember to keep that naivety inside you. Of course, you got to be sharp, but keep that child inside of you that knows, how to enjoy things. I think that's really important because it's a long journey. So you gotta stay connected, and you gotta learn to enjoy new things, right? Because the company evolves. So I enjoy now cracking go-to-market. Like, I was a developer, but I really enjoyed, how do we get the right, demand that for ICP and make sure that we can sell them and retain them and everything, all of that together. So just remember to enjoy what you're doing and look for ways like to keep enjoying. Otherwise, it's tough.
And final question for you. Let's zoom out into the future. So 3 to 5 years from today, what's the vision that you're hoping to build? What does that vision look like?
Yeah, so we want to make a true dent in how software is being developed. We want to be the software delivery management platform. We believe that there's a big need to this type of thing because, we hear a lot of buzz about generative AI and all of that. I think like writing code is one thing. There's a lot of companies focus on that, how you make this more efficient. But people have like this big, I think software industry has this blind spot of, okay, what happens to that code once it's written and makes its way all the way to production? And we want to be that company that orchestrates all that process. We don't want to replace the CI vendors. We don't want to replace the CD vendors. We don't want to replace the feature flag vendors of the world and, the infrastructure players. But we want to be the one that orchestrates all that process, integrates with them so that, those platform engineering and the developers and the team leads, they can write the rules of hey, what happens with this change? And how does it make its way all the way to production and even maybe turn the feature flag on automatically? And, how some other changes need more time. And we think that it will be a true challenge when to apply the human aspect. And that's the vision of software delivery management. It's a big vision because the role of the humans in that process is evolving and changing. And we want to be the ones that enable that transformation and revolution.
Amazing. I love the vision and I love what you're building. We are up on time, so we're going to have to wrap here. Before we do, if people want to follow along with your journey as you build and execute on this vision, where should they go?
They can go to our website, linearb.io. The stories are there. They can go to our LinkedIn page, to our Twitter handle, search for LinearB and follow there.
Amazing. Ori, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about what you're building and share these lessons that you've learned along the way. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I know the audience is going to as well, and really, really appreciate you taking the time. So thanks so much.
And thank you, Brett. This was great.
All right, keep in touch.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.